Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, and I am a data evangelist with DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining today's DATAVERSITY webinar, Data Strategy, where data architecture and data governance collide, sponsored by Reltio. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults is sent to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To find the Q&A or the chat panel, you'll see the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. To answer the most commonly asked question, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within a couple of business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording, and we'll send a link to the recording of this session as well as any other additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me pass it to our sponsor, Reltio, and a brief word from Kim Toomey. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Mark and Peter. Let me share my screen here. Peter, can I take over the screen share?
Now,
Thank you. All right, here we go. Thanks, everybody. My name is Kim Toomey, and I'm a senior solution consultant with Reltio, a leader in the data unification space. Today, we're going to talk about data strategy and specifically how data architecture and governance, when strategically aligned, can best support data usage across your enterprise and deliver trusted data used to make decisions, drive analytical and operational use cases, and power AI initiatives. Architecture and governance really find alignment when all stakeholders work from a unified, connected data foundation, really a living diagram of the enterprise, not siloed systems. When data platforms or technologies are put in place around a data architecture and governance, governance really should not be an afterthought, but built in, especially in this heightened era of enterprise AI. Data governance is foundation to success. Governance surrounding your data ensures that the data is accurate, current, and consistent across systems, and that you're operating in compliance with that data and the permissions associated with it. And then, of course, we want to make sure that that data is kept secure as well. And so to keep data governance and architecture collaboration sustainable, you need to unite technical design and policy intent, enabling continuous curation and coordination. Not just one-off alignment at the beginning as data, models, and rules evolve. We're going to talk just a little bit about the Reltio platform as we get started today, because we are a solution that provides data quality automation where governance teams can define the rules and leverage pre-built agents that automate data governance work to keep this alignment continuous. Now, even though just about everything that we hear today is all about AI, we can't lose sight of the good old goodness in and goodness out analogy. As much as we would love it to be, AI is not a silver bullet, and so it can't magically compensate for a poor data architecture. If you're like most companies, you likely have data about your customers, products, suppliers, assets, locations, and so on in hundreds of internal systems and are most likely using dozens of third-party vendors to enrich that data. And this hairball of data complexity that most large organizations face means that you'll likely have duplicates everywhere. It means you'll find data inconsistencies across the enterprise. And it also means that incomplete data and invalid data could be anywhere and everywhere and growing fast. These types of issues ultimately lead to poor customer experience across channels, customer churn, reduced productivity for your employees, and increased risk from a compliance perspective, to name just a few. We're really at an age where good enough data is no longer good enough. It's not good enough for AI, not for compliance, and not for growth. So let's look at some of the fundamental concepts that you should consider when discussing an enterprise architecture and governance, especially if you're moving towards building a real-time contextualized hub of information. So first, create trusted, unified profiles modeled as logical business entities that a non-technical user can understand. This is a customer and everything we know about them, or a supplier, or a product. And this profile becomes an interoperable asset for your organization. I like to think of these as the nouns that run your business. Secondly, relate these profiles to each other through logical relationships that define and explain all the various relationships your customers might have with you. At Reltio, we believe this is most effectively done with graph technology and a logical data model that can support descriptive relationships. Think of this as the context that is really ideal for feeding into LLMs or to drive agentic experiences. And lastly, aggregate and relate the interactions and transactions these business entities do. Think of these as your verbs. Did I buy something? Did I return it? Submit a claim? Ask for a quote? And this collectively is really what builds your change management foundation for the enterprise. And this end result of strategically architecting a solution to house and manage and governing everything that we saw in that previous slide could look something like this Reltio intelligent data graph. Reltio uniquely delivers the data intelligence that's the bridge between legacy systems and agentic workflows. We bring together entity-centric data that is also augmented with attributes and behavioral information. The resulting profiles are context-rich, and this enables the semantic layer for your data across the enterprise. So your AI agents have the complete context they need to make the right decisions for your business. If you're onboarding a new employee and they asked, where can I find all the information about your existing customer base? How difficult or easy would that be for you to answer accurately? To address these challenges, enterprises must embrace a modern enterprise-level system of record, one that unifies data across all systems and silos, dynamically adapts to changing needs, and serves as a foundation for AI-driven innovation. And really, this becomes your competitive advantage. Companies that can leverage their data as a strategic asset, driving innovation, operational excellence, and the differentiation in the market. Reltio Data Cloud can unify your multi-source core business data into trusted interoperable data. From initial data ingestion to ongoing curation of unified insight-ready data to activate your real-time operational and analytical processes, these advanced capabilities simplify your data management and governance programs. We do this in a cloud-native, multi-tenant, microservices-based architecture. And this is the core foundation of our highly performant and highly scalable modern platform. At Reltio, we're already seeing customers who have embraced this philosophy. Many are undergoing cloud modernization initiatives still, but pairing an agile architecture with native governance capabilities can impact a variety of business outcomes. In this example, a large global insurance broker was able to generate nearly $17 million in annual savings by automating time-consuming processes, reducing errors, and having a trusted, unified view of each customer readily available as it was required for their RFI process. A strategic modern architecture and governance allows for the support of not just one use case like this, but usage across the enterprise, resulting in compounding value for this data set and ultimately incremental business value. Thank you for learning a little bit about Reltio today. For now, I'm going to hand the session back over to Mark and Peter, but please feel free to put questions in the chat or Q&A, and we can take them at the end of the webinar. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you for that wonderful, quick Reltio presentation. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter Aiken is an acknowledged data management authority and associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 40 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in more than 30 countries. Among his 13 books are the first on making the case for data leadership, the first focusing on data monetization and modern strategic data thinking, and the first to objectively specify what it means to be data literate. International recognition has resulted from these, and a pre-COVID-19 and intensive worldwide event schedule. I think that's ramped up again now, Peter. Peter also hosts the longest running data management webinar series on dataversity.net. Before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter founded several organizations that have helped more than 200 businesses leverage data. Specific savings have been measured at more than $1.5 billion. His latest venture is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome, my good friend.
Welcome to you, Mark. You sound almost breathless with that. I'm embarrassed by it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Kim, thanks for a really nice setup on this. It worked, I think, really, really well. So obviously the focus that is on the intersection of these two topics and how you can get each of these what we call practice areas in DAMA to work better together. And you'll get tired of seeing the little thing collide over the a lot of energy is unleashed in that collision, and that's really what I'm talking about here in terms of having these two sometimes work together really well, sometimes do not around this, or even know that they should. So we're going to talk today about confounding characteristics of data, real uneven understanding of cost. I think looking at some of the solutions such as Kim was describing are very, very good, especially when you look at it from a financial perspective. Last part of this introduction, we're going to look at the DIM box foundations that everybody uses to ground in as a common vocabulary. Then we're going to focus in on data governance, then on architecture, and then how strategic focus guiding both of these gives you that proverbial win-win-win situation on this. And of course, we'll invite Kim back in about an hour from now and look at see what sort of questions you guys have come up with. And we always love that part of the event because you guys asked some really good questions on it. So we're looking forward to that. Jumping right in then, from data's perspective, in doing this for 40 years, it's just quite clear that people don't understand data in the same way as blind people don't understand the elephant. While they are fine and wonderful sort of things, it is actually better off to have a really unified understanding. Human data, of course, is exactly the same way when we look at it. To give you a specific example of this occurred during the pandemic, but it was still instructive, and I don't think it's been corrected. American Airlines, according to this Forbes magazine article, was valued at $6 billion on the market, and United Airlines was valued at $9 billion. This pandemic, people weren't flying as much, but the data inside their frequent flyer programs was valued, as you can see, at $30 billion and $22 billion respectively. And I guarantee you that the CEOs of those companies put a lot of effort into trying to realize the market value that occurred there, trying to unlock that value. And one of the challenges that everybody has, not just CEOs, of course, is that data as a unique property is really challenging to understand. It's nearly unlimited. It's not visible. It's cheap, if you will, to keep and transport and make copies of. But if you spill it, it's a mess to clean up. And unfortunately, your organizations are filled with data rot, which is data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. Most importantly, that data is typically of unknown quality, and that makes it a problem all the way around. So data education is generally not existent outside of ET. It's not really well taught, and it's typically missing the business context, which means that all of your knowledge workers in your organization have had to learn how to work with data, very similar to how Wally Easton kind of learned how to play piano well, but maybe not exactly what to your cup of tea is. So Wally's doing real well as far as, juggling the piano balls, and he's playing Yankee Doodle Dandy on this. But the question, of course, comes up: at what do we want our organizations to become good at? And if they're really good at this kind of juggling, what kind of opportunities does this have for this individual, for example, to have learned how to play Beethoven or something along those lines? What really comes out of all of this is that there's always been confusion around data's responsibility. IT thinks data is a business problem. If they can connect to the server, my job is done. It's been an attitude that has been attributed to them. Whereas business thinks IT is managing the data adequately. After all, who else would be taking care of it? And as a result, data has fallen into this enormous chasm between business and IT. And it's really up to us data professionals to try and put it back together, doing this strategy and architecture
combination can be a real feather in your caps individually, because not only do you have to do the new things, but you also have to, in the process of doing the new things, clean the data debt that exists in your organizations. And this data debt slows progress, decreases quality, increases costs, and presents greater risks around all of that. When you do data debt, when you address data debt, first of all, if you don't address it, everything obviously slows, costs more, lower quality, greater risk. But what happens here is that you still have to go and get back to zero when you're doing all of this. And so it's not necessarily the case that dollar invested in turns out to be the cost benefit curve is pushed out further on this. Last introductory topic, just real briefly, is the Damah-Dambach body of knowledge here. And if this is the first time you're seeing it, I apologize, because it should be in everybody's education as they're growing up. Goal here was to describe what is meant by data management, divided up into, in this case, 11 practice areas, as you can see. And the real challenge for the Dambach is that people think that first of all, we're not being prescriptive of how to use it. We're simply saying these are the practices around which most people find benefit and do these kinds of activities. So here I'm showing, for example, data governance and data architecture as two pieces that are possibly going to help, but we probably need, just like in most things in life, to be structurally sound, we need three areas in this. So we'll add the third area of warehousing, and now we have architecture, governance, and warehousing combining to supplement one part of organizational strategy in this. So again, data has got these sort of confounding characteristics, which means most people, including very likely the people that are making decisions at the top, are not knowledgeable about data, about its costs, and about these Dambach foundations that are there. Next section here is going to focus in on data governance around this. And I'll start out with people understanding that corporate governance and IT governance have been accepted for a long time. Corporate governance is the relationship of the organization to society. IT governance is obviously IT helping out with organizational strategy. What is the IT group doing to help further organizational strategy? We've for many years used these definitions of data governance, including the bottom one. I'll take full responsibility for it in the sense that the Dambach also, I don't find a very good definition here. So when you look at these, just for briefly a second, I'm going to destroy them in a second. Imagine trying to have a conversation in an elevator with somebody about what quality control discipline is on that particular one for managing, then as soon as you start that, you've lost whatever executive was interested in this. And so I don't find these definitions useful. And really, when we think about how important elevators are, you could be, approaching one, and the boss hops in and looks down and says, "Okay, what's going on here?" And you've got a little bit of time to make an impression. Well, if they ask you the question, what is data governance? It's probably best to have a good answer if you're expecting to have your efforts make any difference. So I like to coach people to use the phrase managing data with guidance. That will work in an elevator ride of any length. And people understand that if they get that far and say, okay, I guess without data governance, we are managing data without governance. Would you want your sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset managed without guidance? The answer is no. I changed this definition just by adding one word here, in the sense that it's really managing data decisions with guidance. Because sometimes when somebody says, we're going to install Salesforce by January 1st, without knowledge of what that really entails, it's a huge responsibility. So governance is all about decisions that are involved in data. And we've seen a lot of challenges around it. This is really almost 10 years worth of data that Randy Bean and Tom Bavenport have accomplished on this. I'm going to sum it up in a couple of simple charts, which is in 2003, 60% of organizations, first time it passed 50% in the times we had been looking at this data, had passed more than half of them, driving innovation with data. 41% were competing on data and analytics, 40% managing data as an asset, 24% managing data-driven culture, and 21, 1 in 5 managing a data culture. That's in 2023. If we go to 2024, we saw some very nice improvements here. You can see the numbers go way up. In my estimation, I think they were being overly enthusiastic, and sure enough, the next year, 2025, you look and see that two of these numbers came down fairly significantly. But while this is interesting in that it shows that not everybody's got a really good idea of how to do this, even though they've been trying for, in theory, 10 years on this. The other question that I found was so important on this particular survey that they did was, were your problems that you were dealing with from a data perspective technology driven or people and process driven? And in 2018, you can see the answer was 80-20. In 2019, it was fairly similar. 2020, 2021, 2022. Are you getting the picture? Again, very clear that the problems with data are not technology problems largely, they are people and process problems. And if you ask the question, what group is best poised to be of assistance to people and process oriented data challenges, the answer has to be data governance. This is why lack of data governance costs organizations millions in productivity, siloed efforts, badly thought out hardware and software purchases, including, of course, cloud, delayed decision making, reactive instead of proactive. And let's be fair, 20 to 40% of IT spending can be reduced through use of better data governance. So that's an area that you can go and claim savings in almost instantly as you look at this, because each of these produces a series of hidden data factories, each of these data flaws, I should say, where Department B is making corrections to Department A's work and Department C is correcting Department B's, and then C has to do it over again because they still didn't get it right. So there's 3 hidden data factors that they have to go through. Well, these hidden data factories are insidious in our organizations for the most part. Again, one particular data problem manifests itself as a number of different types of organizational challenges. In fact, each visibility, each symptom that is seen is going filtered. Each data symptom that's seen is filtered through an IT system or business process or a combination of both. And this means that one small problem can be causing a variety of things, but until the data governance team gets together and understands all of these results come together with the same cause, and fixing that one cause is that piece that comes as a result of doing root cause analysis in these areas. And most importantly, by making sure that it's done with a team that gets better about the processes and practices that it's doing in order to do this. When you're looking at getting started with data governance, there's all this stuff that you're supposed to put together in the beginning that gives you an idea of where you're going. But don't spend a lot of time on this because it only occurs once. What happens is that you'll then get into a series of adaptive processes that will allow you to improve your practice. And this is the part that you really need to get better at, focusing in on this. And if you read this at a very, very high level of abstraction, as I guess I do with lots of things these days, it looks to me an awful lot like the Deming quality cycle of plan, do, act, check, right? It's very similar. So the question from a data governance perspective is not how are we going to govern all of this data? The right question is this data valuable enough that we should include it within the scope of our data governance practices? And regardless of what the answer is, document the decision so that you understand it. I'm going to close out this section here now with just a quick data governance story about a company in the Midwest that was a Fortune 500 story. And when I got there, there was a room full of about 100 associates, and there's paper flying around all over the place. It was kind of sort of exciting day on Wall Street kind of vibe that came out of it. And I asked the question, I said, what's going on? And they said, well, this is the room that takes the data from our computer systems that aren't working out as well as we want. And basically everything that comes out on the invoice is incorrect. And so they are changing all of this. The data the customer service is provided is wrong. The amount that we charge them, whether it was successful or not, all of these things have to be manually completely redone. It takes us 30 days after each bill is produced to get a correct bill out to the customer. And of course, I'm hearing this, I'm thinking that this is a $9 billion a year corporation, and that 30-day delay is a $850 million proposition around this. And yet, when I talked to the manager in room responsible for running this operation of 100 people, he said that he wasn't thinking at all of the way I was thinking. He was thinking he just had the best quarter, the best year that he had ever had, and that he needed perhaps to double the number of people that were in the room here. Now, you can all see, of course, this is treating the symptoms rather than treating the cause. And luckily, I was able to walk down the hall to talk to the chief financial officer, who said to me, look, if you can fix this problem in less than $750 million, then it's a positive return on investment in 30 days. And the question is not, what should we be investing to fix this? But you talk to a big corporation about improving cash flow on their annual sales by 30 days, they will absolutely listen to what you have to say if they have that particular problem. So that's a rather extreme example of data governance. Let's move on now to data architecture. And let's talk first of all about the roles that occur given this kind of a process, because in most governance situations, management draws a line around some folks and says, these are sort of leaders and these are stewards, and then there's everybody else. And we've got to have a good foundation of IT, because if we don't have a good IT foundation, nothing can happen as far as this. And leadership is responsible in general for obtaining resources, data, feedback, listening to what's going on, learning a little bit about it. They're making decisions and asking the stewards to take some action based on the various decisions that are coming in, which should make some changes to the way in which people are interacting with the organization's data on this. There should be, of course, feedback appropriately, different ideas that pop in from time to time, guidance, et cetera, et cetera. But data architecture grounds or constrains all of these conversations. There's just too much at once to have this. But with a well laid out architecture, the organization can literally point to something on a map and say, this is what happens. Architecture by itself is a foundational form of collaboration. It obviously can be practiced by sole practitioners. That's not what I'm saying that it always is. But when it's practiced collaboratively, when it's practiced coordinatedly, it is practiced collaboratively. And again, just refresh our memories, architecture is all about learning about the things that you have in your scope and the functions of those things, what they do and how they interact as they're doing whatever it is that they do. And so this kind of a process of understanding things at this level gives us a number of different architectures that can be managed: business, process, system, security, technical, data, and information. Of course, we're concerned here. Every organization that is functional has a form of architecture. The only question is it understood? And that usually correlates to documented, because if they're not understood, they can't be useful to the organization. The same, of course, is true of data architectures, because if we don't get the data architecture right, it's kind of like the story of the Princess on the Pea by Hans Christian Andersen. Here at the bottom of the princess's bed for 20 cushions that she's sitting on is a pea, and it's discomforting her and making her sleepless. This is because the data that is not properly organized and treated properly becomes sand in the organizational functions. And we, of course, want to watch ourselves and not get too far into the sandwich part of things. I'll stop with the puns, but talk about something that I've called for a long time, a data sandwich that's necessary, because in all of your organizations, you are dependent on high performance automation. Usually this is involving three components that are not managed well: data literacy of the people that are interacting with the data and the people that are processing the data supply itself, and the data standards and data processes that are employed in this. And of course, they're generally uneven at first, but with leadership and resources showing a positive return on investment, they can be made more neatly, shave the rough edges of them off, and try to get them to work in a coordinated fashion. Now, this, of course, cannot happen without investments in engineering and architecture. And yet, for some reason, I lived to the age of about 50 or so, maybe even 55, and was on a tea farm in India when I saw this wonderful Deming quality sign hanging up behind the cash register. It said, "Quality engineering work products do not happen accidentally." I'm not sure. I didn't get a chance to ask the gentleman why he had that up there, but it was certainly inspiring to see it. Of course, once again, we add the word data to this and understand that quality data engineering and architecture products cannot happen accidentally, because data architectures need to be organized in architecture. In fact, an architecture is functionally incomplete if we don't have all of them guided by some sort of strategy. So how do data structures support strategy? Consider the opposite question. If your systems weren't explicitly designed to be integrated or otherwise work together, what's the likelihood that they will happen to? What that means is that you're spending a lot of organizational friction to try and address those and make them more sound. The answer is strictly trying to achieve effectiveness and efficiency goals, or providing organizational dexterity so that it can adapt to circumstances that might be changing. Again, depends on what your environment are. So how are these components expressed as architectures? We start out with the details, and the details are then organized into larger components. But this is an intricate process where we're doing very, very careful work around this. Then we go to the larger components. These intricate components are organized into models, and these models contain dependencies, which further complicates what we're doing. None of this is, by the way, rocket science, but it is very, very careful work that needs to be done on this. And of course, finally, the models are organized into larger architectures, and all architectures are incomplete without accruing up to one of four goals: faster, better, cheaper, less risky. This is, in data sense, the attributes that contain the intricacies, the entities and objects, their dependencies, and the models organized into architectures give us a purposefulness. Now, I've shown, notice, a list of attributes and a small portion of a small data model that's on there. I'm not showing you any large enterprise architectures. That's because they tend to all look something like this. It's a large collection of information, and the real challenge is it's kind of not been effective for people to do this. Again, it's kind of like trying to architect after implementation. Generally not a good idea, and does not produce useful results quickly. For example, if I was told that I had to put a swimming pool in the basement of the pyramid, of course, is made of large rocks on top of shifting sand, is not going to do that. Let's talk about what enterprise architecture reality is in most organizations. As an enterprise architect, you're probably not doing too much new enterprise architecture. Instead, what you're doing is refining an existing one, fixing some stuff that breaks. By the way, the picture over there is an AI image of this topic, which obviously didn't do a very good job on that, but I thought that was interesting just to share with you all. Again, you're probably going to be implementing specific dictated improvements. These may be dictated by software packages, by moves from one technology to another technology, other reasons that occur in this, that you work on integrations, because that is something that you can add some value to. For some reason, management doesn't understand that you can add value to that. And hopefully you'll spend some time simplifying your existing environment. Real important that you are able to address it from that perspective, because after all, things tend to get more and more and more complicated. And if we don't take some concentrated effort and some time and say, look, what can we do to make our environment simpler? Not that you try to go for simple, but simpler. It is well worth your time to put effort into that. So let's do a couple quick takeaways on data architecture. A data architecture is a structure of data-based, not databases, data-based assets supporting the implementation of your organizational strategy. Most organizations have data assets that are not supportive of strategies. That means their information architectures are not that useful. So the question is, how can organizations more effectively use their data architecture to support strategy? Well, let's talk about what is meant by use of a data architecture. It's an application of the data asset towards strategic objectives. We have relative maturity that should be higher rather than lower in order to come up with the ability to adapt and improve. This results in better capabilities, better dexterity, better self-awareness. Again, some organizations just can't turn on a dime and need to be, unfortunately, made aware of that the hard way. Again, what can we do through data-centric practices, including taxonomy, stewardship, and repository use? And then the question comes up finally, how does an organization get better use of it? Well, continuous redevelopment. The starting point isn't the beginning. You're going to be working within an existing structure, and these components can follow a well-engineered re-engineering path using an incremental iterative approach, focusing on one component, applying formal transformations. And that's as much time as I have to say on that, but that's a bunch. So we've focused on data governance. We've focused on data architecture. Now let's see what we can talk about as far as looking at organizational focus, how to use these two powerful practice areas together. And once again, that's an idea that we go back to the concept of strategy. So strategy is a relatively new word. This is a Google Trends graph that just shows that the word strategy didn't start to be used a lot until just after the end of the 50s, when the management consultants got a hold of it and went, wow, we can sell this to people. I'm being very cynical, but it is unfortunately 100% true. So strategy became this master plan, and there was a a strategy deck or a strategy book that the organization had, and it gave them this idea of how they were going to lay out the next 10 years. The idea, of course, that we can plan 3 years out is kind of difficult as well. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have strategy. It just means we need to use it differently. Let me illustrate the difference. This unfortunate view that came about a strategy is that it is a thing, and that the thing that you write down is the important portion of it. So you have to pay a lot of attention to writing it down. Again, not a problem. It usually comes up with some pretty good results, but the original use of the word strategy came from the military, and they defined it as a pattern in a stream of decisions. And notice that is a process-oriented perspective rather than a noun-oriented perspective. And that is an important distinction, because when you're looking at how can I possibly coordinate my data governance with my data architecture groups on this, this is a great way to do it. Find out what is the strategy of your organization. Let me give you a few examples of strategies just so that you know what to look for. Again, if they hand you 100 PowerPoint slides, that's probably not the answer, although it's worth looking because it might be in there. I sound a little cynical on this, but I've looked at an awful lot of these things. So here's a former business strategy for Walmart that's very simple. 4 words: every day low price. And most importantly, everybody on the Walmart Express, those are the regional airlines that go out to the Bentonville airport and back, taking people to and from Walmart, and also to other really fine corporations that live out there. Tyson's Food and J.B. Hunt, I believe, is the transportation company out there. Great organizations, $3 trillion organizations right there in Bentonville. I drank as much of the water as I could for the 3 years I lived there, but I digress. Everybody knows this. Walmart cashiers know this. Walmart customers know this. Walmart has done a great job of associating themselves with the value that comes from this phrase, and it's something that they pay a lot of attention to. This is really critical to get because it's a simple piece of guidance. Once again, go back to the definition that I have here, a pattern in a stream of decisions. If you always, in your pattern, err on the side of everyday low price, Walmart generally doesn't have a complaint with you. And I'm not talking as an official Walmart, I'm talking about as a cultural observer of 3 years. It was a very pleasant existence that I did. Anyway, that's sort of the Walmartish story. Let's jump a little ahead to a different story, which maybe you don't recognize here, but is worth taking just a quick look at. This is a purported, and I have no reason to believe it's not, a 1957 version of Disney's strategy. And if you look at it, it is awesome. And I don't use that word lightly. They did just a great job of articulating what they were planning to do. And by the way, they implemented it. So one very nice piece of strategy work right here. I've given you the reference if you want to go grab it yourself, or of course you're going to get the slides when we're done with all of this. Anyway, the wrong way to think about data strategy is as a derivation or an offshoot of organizational strategy via the IT strategy. This is typically how most people have done it in the past because it seemed natural. I sampled Morgan Freeman there, just have him saying this is wrong, because of course it is. The proper way is that they are really peer activities with probably more influence coming from the data strategy side than going to the IT side. It's just critical to understand that IT is not a great articulant of business value. And I don't mean that broadly. And I have some friends that are really good. So obviously present company accepted. But when you think about the average price of an ERP being $50,000 an employee, that is hard to imagine what type of boost in productivity would result in $50,000 accruing to the systems that we have out there today. It's just almost inconceivable. So let's take a look at data strategy, which is really the highest level of data guidance that's available. It means that we're going to focus the data activities on business goal achievement. Similarly, governance and strategy can be, architecture can be focused on business goal achievement. Start drawing some Venn diagrams. See what falls into these various categories and what are the overlaps. Once again, you're trying to provide guidance when faced with a stream of decisions or uncertainty. So it's not, oh my gosh, something happened that wasn't the plan and we need to go consult it. It's, this is how you operate day in and day out, working back and forth on these. The data strategy most usefully articulates how data can be best used to support organizational strategy. I worked hard on that sentence in case you can't tell. Again, it's going to be some matter of remediative and proactive types of activities. Let's see it in action here. Organizational strategy obviously would guide data strategy. There is no other purpose of data strategy than to support organizational strategy. The question is, how can the data assets and data practices best support organizational strategic implementation and achievement? Data governance, then, is what data assets should do to better support the strategy. And this is how we can take and reshape incrementally, typically, but oftentimes it can be radical. And the feedback that comes back is, of course, how well is it working? We, of course, have our stewards that are involved in this. And this is question is, what's the most effective use of these scarce and valuable resources? Then, of course, what's planning and progress and all the rest of the things here. You'll notice there's a little bit of space, and I left it open because data strategy must be expressed in business goals. And this is, of course, how you tie it into the data architecture pieces, business goals. What can your architecture do to support better achievement of business goals using the vocabulary, the common, shared, controlled vocabulary of metadata, and making sure that the stewards also speak that exact same language? Because only within this context and a trusted architecture can you hope to make some significant efforts. Governance needs architecture, and architecture also needs governance. Let's take a look at the frameworks that evolve this. And this is a bit involved, so sort of hang on tight and brace yourselves for some sort of advanced data modeling stuff here. But let's first of all put things into a framework. The whole concept of modeling and architecture and strategy and governance can be focused in on these boxes that I'm going to show you here. There's the as is system, in other words, how it currently is, the to be system, how we'd like it to be. Then there are two dimensions of that. One of them is not validated, the other is validated. We'd prefer to work with validated because, as you can see, not validated is a cross your fingers situation. And here was validated, no problem at all. Then, of course, we can break it up this way: conceptual, logical, and physical models. This universe, if you will, is the entire universe for doing any sorts of modeling in here. Again, the idea is we're going to start off with conceptual, which is usually a description, use cases, something like that, a logical model of how it's going to be built, and then the physical as-built system. And every architectural challenge can be mapped to some sort of transformation in this framework. So it's a really useful way to organize and see it. Let's look at the to-be side of it for just a quick second. Remember, we don't want to work with the validated side, the side that's not, the not validated side. We want to work with the validated side, because then we're working with factual information. And this is typically what people call forward engineering, and is the only skill that we teach undergraduates. However, we should recognize that that only represents 20% of the effort and funding in the real world. Reverse engineering is much more likely to be encountered, to the tune of 20–80% on this. Again, reverse engineering is evolving an existing system using a structured technique aimed at recovering rigorous knowledge of the existing system to leverage enhancement efforts. That's going from physical as is to logical as is, logical as is to conceptual as is. That second step is not always required, but if you are going to change the requirements, you do need to that second step. So re-engineering then is first reverse engineering the existing system to understand its strengths and weaknesses, and next use this information to design the new system. This is truly the word re-engineering. It's super, super helpful. It's the best way to think about being able to make a change in terms of these combinations of practice areas that I'm describing to you. So let's look at how the evolution of this occurs and what are sort of the main challenges. The first one is that there's some sort of data leadership. They may not be anointed as data leaders, but somebody, one of you is pushing hard and saying, somebody ought to pay attention to this and do a little bit more work around it. Eventually you say, yeah, that means we need to do some data governance. And I'm just going to give a very simple example of data governance. We're no longer going to use the term allow people to put a free text clear field in to put in the vendor name, because then we end up with IBM, International Business Machines, Mexico. You get the picture. There's lots and lots of different ones, and it becomes problematic. So the governance is that over time, we'll stop people from inputting it themselves, make them pick it off a pick list, and that will improve data over time. Everybody goes, that sounds like a great idea. How come it takes so long? Well, that way does. However, you may be under pressure, and many of you are, to do something faster. And that's a proactive focus where data governance really does approach the data architecture group and says, let's, the two of us, work together and try to improve data and data practices as a result of focus. And people will see that as faster. It's also easier to demonstrate a return on investment. That's the subject of a different topic, but we can certainly get into that maybe during the Q&A if people want to do that. Once you get a little bit of sort of focus on this, and again, it doesn't take people too much effort to figure out that I gave you $100 last year and you returned to me clearly $150, I'm much more likely to give you more money this year than I am than not. So again, just practice makes perfect, but that's a really good way to think about it. We're good at data things happening, but what we have to get better at is translating that into organizational things happening. And that's a real challenge for us. Again, we could say great things, but if we can't articulate them in terms that the business understands, it's not going to be helpful. The data architecture components become targets of these re-engineering digitization efforts in here. And let's talk about how we need to make these things articulated. We can say clean some data, but it's better if we say decrease the number of undeliverable targeted marketing ads, reorganize the database, increase the ability of the sales force to perform their own analysis, develop a taxonomy, create a common vocabulary. By the way, every CEO in the world will tell you getting their people to talk the same language is one of the most important and hardest challenges that they face in there. Optimize a query. Oh my God, you're going to put me to sleep, right? Shaved a 1 second off of a task that runs 1 billion times a day. Well, that's 1 billion seconds, and it's kind of easy to add up. And particularly if it happens to be running on expensive hardware, that can be pretty easy to quantify. Reverse engineer the legacy system. Oh my. Understand what's good and bad about it, so we can keep what we want to preserve and improve what we think is not up to par. Another important aspect of this is to consider the cultural, sociocultural aspects of it. And that is to just simply make it a way of life. I encountered this machine. It didn't change my mind, but it made me really easily understand what it was. Again, you're strapped into a little seat that stops you and says, this is going to simulate a 5-mile-an-hour collision. Imagine what would happen if you didn't have your seatbelt on. And I've always put my seatbelt on, not to be a hoity-toity, but this is a really good way of articulating that. And it's difficult to practice something after it's been learned, after the driving's been taught. So if you talk to younger people nowadays, they don't know what defensive driving is. And I've just outlined the principles there from Wikipedia so that you can see there are some good principles. It's very, very useful. But this item called the convincer was one of the better items to be able to talk into it. We've got to have the same kind of thing. Not that I want to strap people into a thing and crash them into the walls, but we do have to have some way of kind of grabbing their attention. And let me illustrate a little bit how that works out. It's fine to improve your organization's data because data points to valuable things. It has intrinsic value all in of itself, and it has inherent combinational value, which means adding 1 and 1 can often equal 11 rather than just simply 3 on this. But you can't stop there. You have to continue to also improve the way people use its data because most people have not been trained. They don't have a good idea how to value it, which is using data to measure or to manage or to motivate change all the way up and down on here. You've got to do both of these things before you can improve the way your data and your people support your organizational strategy. And so I'm going to tell you a great story about creating a competitive advantage with data that came to me through Rolls-Royce. A wonderful, wonderful story here. First of all, we don't tend to worry about getting on airplanes when we travel around the world. I just recently completed a tour that went from Ecuador, a couple stops at home, but then did Zurich, Warsaw, and Munich, and then Shanghai, and then Costa Rica. So it was a whirlwind, and I wasn't worried about these engines failing on me. I actually don't know whether they were GEs or Rolls-Royce, but they're probably one of the two on this. But Rolls-Royce in and of itself had a really interesting conversation that they wanted to have. And the problem was they sold things that worked. And so the airlines would simply say, give me your engines and don't talk to me because you're just a vendor. That was the old model. They sold jet engines. The new model became selling hours of powered thrust. Ooh, this is one that gives MBAs a chill as far as that goes. They had a great name for it, power by the hour. Again, if what they did is they completely changed the dynamic. Instead of being across the table and selling the engines directly, they instead were on the same side of the table and working side by side. And if we made money, you made money. If you make money, we make money. And that's kind of a good thing. They actually did this, though, because they wanted to have some conversations with the vendor, the people who bought the airlines. And one of them was about NASCAR. Actually, I started out with NASCAR, but it's actually Formula One where we ended up taking the examples from. But you'll see the example is very, very similar. For example, here is the 1950s Indianapolis 500. Now, you can't hear the sound on this. I don't think it came through. But the driver comes in. You can see him hitting the tire with a hammer. It's kind of interesting. Jacks the front up, refuel. They do mention that there's a constraint. They can only have 4 people working on the car. That's okay. But they spend a fair amount of time. And I cut it real quick just because I didn't want to share the whole thing. It turns out to be long. So they polish the windshield, send him back home. So the measure is 67 seconds to change 2 tires. And you can believe they were working as hard as they could with the 4 people they were allowed. Now, don't blink. Because you now have a new metric of 4 tires in 4 seconds. Again, very nice in terms of just giving the example. And the point was Rolls-Royce wanted to have the airlines understand that they could change an engine on a plane faster probably than the airlines could. They wanted to have that conversation to see if they could additionally become useful to them. There was a process called wing to wing. And this new model of how Rolls-Royce was doing this celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2012. So again, it's 50 years old in 2012. So very, very interesting in terms of looking at this. What ends up happening when you look at this is that not just did they get good results in terms of being able to change the engine faster and getting more details on it, but the change from perhaps even a single solitary sensor on an airplane to something that has lots of sensors and continuous monitoring. I believe I saw the number 9 million pieces of data per second come out of these engines so that the engine operators can monitor them and see what's going on and know well in advance when there's any sort of issues in terms of their performance. And they just do a fantastic job. But this translates into savings in a very tangible way because they didn't need to store as many parts and they didn't need to handle them. They had opportunity costs that they could put in time elsewhere, and the maintenance was reduced. It was a total of $1.5 billion, which is so easy to justify to management when you are able to do this. But once again, remember the real thing that happened here was they changed the dynamic of the business opportunity. They moved from a products company to a services company, which is a very difficult to implement sort of process. Again, not easy to take care of. So just one example here, and it comes up with an enormous number. That's not my number, that's a different number in there, but you can use all of these components to put together things and allow you to sort of start figuring out where you can focus. So again, remember, most people do not understand data nearly as well as you do. That doesn't mean talk down to them, that never works, but it is the case that you will have to be having examples that are easily understandable and also quantifiable, because if you're able to quantify it, it becomes easy for people to take a look at. They can, like I said, I gave you $100 last week, you gave me 150 this week. That's kind of easy. Sure, I'll take the risk the second time and invest in this and see what we can come up with. And sure, there's going to be a diminishing return at some point, but that's where careful monitoring can help as far as that goes. And of course, everything should be grounded into the DAMA DIMBOK foundations, the practice areas. If this is your first time hearing about it, go to dama.org and take a quick look and let us know what you think out there. Of course, you'll be able to jump in just a few minutes and we can try and Kim and I toss some questions back and forth as far as that goes. Again, the focus here on data governance, you really need an elevator pitch to make sure that everybody can get on the same sheet of paper. It's, of course, the same message when we get to strategy. Everybody needs to have something that works there. As a musician, I just like putting the music icon in there. That was not AI that did that, although, gosh, it seems popular in AI these days to brand yourself accordingly. So I kept it to one of the four areas that we've got on here. But yes, you've got to be on that same sheet of paper. It's also important to understand how to quantify these things. And it's not a difficult exercise to do. You just need some time and dollar costs, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, there's lots of stuff out there on the web you can go find that'll help you take a look at it. If you have trouble, go to the DATAVERSITY channel and look up some of the topics that we've done in the past there. Again, it's going to require, though, it's going to benefit from, I should really say benefit from, a dedicated team. Somebody, you want people that are good at this and to keep getting good at it. You want to be able to rotate new people in and off the team. You want to be able to train as many people in the organization as you possibly can. I call it opening up your own little DAMA chapter inside of your organization. And that really does help bring people together. So when we look at it from that perspective, data governance is about finding and fixing problems. Data architecture is about mapping to those problems, taking the X-ray, if you will, to find out whether or not that's the right place to go in and remove something or other, or correct a defect or something along those lines. Again, architecturally, it's a wonderful place for collaborativity, and yet it's not also well understood, unfortunately. But whatever you put together can only function as well as it is architected. It's just very, very difficult to re-architect when something has been architected. And so then what you're not at all, it's a very clever, most organizations able to do this. You fine tune, you move it, you try and change the battleship by moving it a little forward and a little backwards, and turn it all the way around. But it's a non-trivial process, particularly for large organizations, and it helps to keep the improvements practically focused on strategy. Because if you do keep it focused on strategy, it's easy for management to understand its importance. Again, forgive me, but just take an example of Windows 11. What was that? I'm certain it was, because I always like getting proved wrong, and somebody will come up with an example, but hard to see how that could have figured into an organization strategy, given that kind of a context on there. So you take some data governance as tools, you take data architecture as a map, you use strategy as the motivation. And again, it's a process, not a product. Understand a bit about defensive driving within there. And recall the story that I told you earlier. Most of you may remember that it was $9 billion a year that this organization was delaying cash flow on by 30 days. Just take that to your CFO and they'll tell you that's not a good idea as far as that goes. So hopefully this has been useful while you're getting ready for the Q&As. Kevin and I will be around in just 2 minutes or so. I'm going to do some quick takeaways. The first one is that data architecture and data governance is increasing. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't need to understand how it works. Data volume in general is increasing. Data governance is generally a new discipline. And it's going to be bespoke for organizations. So I can't come in and practice yours in order to do this. There is no single best way, but you guys are the experts in how to do that. It must be strategy driven, so you re-engineer opportunistically, quantify strategic improvements that are in there, implement your programmatically in there. It'll benefit much from it. And focus on reusable shared results that implements data as a program, not as a project, gradually add ingredients, learn the value of storytelling to improve the data governance, data effectiveness over time, and get the organization itself more literate as you do it. And we are back to the top of the hour. There's a quick look at my books. Of course, you got to take a look at them. And we'll invite Kim to jump back in here and see what further questions you guys have.
Well, as always happens, Peter, there's been a debate spring up in chat, and I'm actually going to start with this because I really like how the questioner brought on this topic. And it'll be a fascinating discussion between you and Kim and I. Do we really need data architecture, they say? I had a VP of strategy and architecture tell me that data architecture was the same as application architecture and put data architecture under the director of application architecture. Then the director of application architecture got rid of the data architecture because the DBAs could do data architecture. It sounds like a common tale of woe in business.
Well, of course, everybody's trying to replace people with AI and things like that. We won't go into those types of topics. But Kim, do you want to weigh in here, or do you want me to go first, or Mark, you want to jump in? This will be a fun one. Yes. Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead, Kim. You can lead off.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that there will continue to be a proliferation of applications across the enterprise. I think nobody would debate that. Nobody's really getting rid of more tools. They're just continuing to get new ones, and those in turn create more data. So I think that there's, room for both of those disciplines. And
Oh, for sure.
I think the trick really is that they need to work together harmoniously so that specific applications can do what they do best. But then you still have this concept of how do you use the data that's being generated by all of these applications in a really intelligent way.
Nice. What I really liked when you were doing your presentation, Kim, was that what you called the hairball slide, the hairball of data
I got to check on
architecture.
that one too, and I have 5 cats.
And
Yeah.
and that happens if you don't respect data architecture as a practice in your organization. Like, what are you doing? And the DBAs, don't sit it with the DBAs. They're just living every day to keep your systems up. Like, have
Yeah,
mercy on those poor
exactly.
folks. Peter, do you
Exactly.
what's your opinion
The,
there?
the, the only point I'll differentiate with the two of you guys on is really that I have actually seen quite a number of DBAs who are rather mature in their profession and can easily function as architects. But that is not an excuse to get rid of your architects. You need to have people that function. And as I was saying earlier, the first of all, you're even if you're 100% either on-prem or in cloud, it doesn't really matter. The data architecture is the only thing that's going to tell you what connects all of the application architecture work products that are out there. And that is the part that people, so yes, still need DAs. Maybe their focus is slightly less on creating and more on documenting and understanding or something along those lines. But I do absolutely believe that we're going to have them in the future.
We do have a couple of questions in Q&A here, and one which I think could be its own webinar. So we'll try this one here. Are there any alternative words that might be used instead of governance? Often governance is seen as a stick and as the data police. I've been called a data cop before. I've heard alternative words like data enablement, data readiness. What do you think, Peter and Kim?
I would agree that governance sometimes comes as a loaded word. On the other hand, we're also still trying to figure out what to call master data, right? So, you can take these things far. I think everybody generally understands. Let me just flip back to that particular page so that everybody gets what we're talking about. It is a centric discipline in terms of what we need to have. Let's see, it's 17. There we go. Yeah, right up there. Again, clearly it's a function that organizations need to be paying attention to. And then again, our frustration, if you will, in the data community is that we don't encounter this. We do have some limited set of universities and things that are pushing this, but overall, you have to come to Dataversity. And don't get me wrong, Dataversity is a great place to go. I go there as well, right? We love Dataversity, but gosh, it just seems sad that you'd have to go to a specialized sort of form like that. Something that should be really basic understanding. I, for example, contend that this is information that MBAs should understand as they're taking on their new role in leadership in their organization. Sorry, Mark, I went way far the topic on that one, but did any of that make sense and give you anything to work with?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And well, and I appreciate the insight, Peter. Like that's absolutely spot on. Kim, do you have any sense of that from the Reltio side?
I would say, kind of in response to, are there other words for governance, or if governance feels like the data police, right? It's an opportunity for data literacy across the organization, right? You kind of have to reposition that narrative and get people on board, and understanding why the architecture of this does become so important is so that the right business teams and users have access to what they need, and therefore in the ideal all rainbows and sunshine world, data governance is your friend, right? That's what enables you, while keeping your company compliant and organized, and efficient, with really its most valuable asset in a lot of ways. So maybe some additional knowledge and collaboration across the organization, but try to make those data governance folks your friends, and I think you'll go a long way.
Oh, for sure. I like the sunshine, unicorns, and rainbows bit. It's because it's very true. There's
Well,
the
I'll
utopian ideal where all of this stuff exists.
and works. Make
And
people
works
practice it.
and works the way it should.
So
Yeah.
we'll toss in one more thing here. Maybe this is something that'll be helpful. Most of the time, when you're talking to people outside of the roles that I'm showing here on the screen, they'll have a lower level of interest in whatever it is you're talking about than you will. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's good reasons why they should want to get interested in it, but just realistically, they've got other things that they're thinking about. So I would refer to all of this as the data program. Maybe that's the question that they were trying to get out. I'd just say it's part of the doing data right, and they'll get it. Now, I used to use the and remember the old Charlie Brown's teacher thing where it went wah 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 wah. Most people remember that, at least with good levels. Smart, thinking it's fun and associating it with good things. But yeah, so maybe calling all of this a data program would be easier than trying to explain about the components in it. I just find that that's a particularly helpful kind of approach on there.
Well, and like what I tell people all the time too, Peter, is it doesn't matter what these things are called, what these concepts are called at your organization. What matters is the activity and the roles. So
Mm,
it's what you're actually doing that matters more than sticking to what a book calls them. I do appreciate the DM book, obviously, but if the word governance is a struggle, or the other one that we run into all the time, Peter, is data owner. People just hate the
mm.
term data owner. Well, then don't call it that. It's fine. What matters is the accountability, and what matters is what that role means to a functioning program, right?
Yep, good stuff.
Uh, we have another $1 million question in Q&A, which I appreciate. Where should the data architecture role be situated? IT, CIO, data governance, data engineering, or where exactly?
Mark, you want to start that one off?
Thanks for putting me on the spot on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and data governance too. I've like in my career, I've been all over the place, from even reporting up through a CFO. Most times when I've worked on architecture, I've been closely aligned with IT, and either being an accidental DBA at the same time, or at least close enough to the DBAs to really have a good sense of mapping out our architecture. Yeah. I remember going to a facilities printer at one university and finding the large format printer so we could print out a wall of an architecture diagram that looked not too dissimilar from that before we implemented a new student information system.
We did one at George Mason University that took the like the 20 by 30-foot screen to produce the entire thing for.
Yeah. And
It's not, we're not making fun of them. They were super useful at the time. We didn't have nearly the tools that we have accessible now. On the other
yeah,
hand, can you guys believe this? Case tools are not mentioned as part of undergraduate curriculum, right? Imagine
I'm
learning
aware.
project management and then being told after the class was over, oh, by the way, there's some software that does everything you just spent all semester sweating over perfectly well for you, right? It's like, oh, goodness.
Well, and you can have an architecture document like this that represents the systems, the flow of data, but you may not even have master data represented in there, especially back in ye olden days in the late 90s, early 2000s, when master data for a lot of organizations was a whisper in the minds of folks there and a dream that was seldom realized. I mean, that's still kind of true today. People struggle with master data. Where do we put it? How do we architect it? And that is an excellent segue to our good friend from Reltio, Kim. Like,
Yeah, I was gonna say, can't weigh in on there. Where should the architects be housed?
I think I would just echo. I typically see that role more aligned either in like IT or data engineering somewhere. But again, I feel like again these are cross-functional conversations. They're
mhm.
roles that kind of span a few different teams, if you will, for the maximum efficiency and effectiveness there. So that's kind of where I think they tend to land.
Mhm.
100%.
It's, I think what you've heard is that it's different for organizations, and different organizations have different needs. So hopefully, if you're uh, interviewing for an architect position, make sure that you find out that the type of architecture that they're going to be practicing is something that you want to learn how to use as well, because otherwise you may get caught, with all your least favorite tasks being the most important management priorities. Not that I've heard a lot of architectures complain about this, but again, we know there's downward pressure on them, and management is saying, "Why do I need these individuals? They are smart, but they're expensive." And the answer is they're probably what's keeping together all of your vast types of complexities out there. And again, I don't want to gloss over that point. It's just a second in the seminar, but how much time do you actually have to make your environment simpler? I've got a group that I'm working with right now that is taking 5 major systems and consolidating them down to 2. And they're unfortunately up against a January 1st deadline. So it's a kind of a breathtaking kind of thing whether they're going to make it, but we'll see what happens. Believe me, they have architects working on the problems. It's a very fun, exhilarating time for them, but they're not quite sure how much overtime is going to be required between now and January 1st. Anyway, I got digress a little bit. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kim.
That's that's a tight 11 weeks. And maybe
Mm.
don't tell it to them that way. Just make them continue to live in their sunshine, unicorns, and rainbows world that it's next year. That sounds like a terrifying deadline. We do have another $1 million question, as I like to say in chat. So thank you, chat, for putting these great questions in. What about AI governance? Will that affect the data governance models that we have at present?
Again, you guys want to go first?
I think you could take this one on first, Peter.
Well, I'm a little bit controversial about it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I know, really. Um, I believe that, first of all, not all your data should be governed, and that you should have an important decision-making criteria as to whether the data warrants being governed, because it does require an investment in it. That said, wouldn't it be nice if all of your data was of known qualities, which meant that it would be useful in this case for using as inputs into AI? Two benefits accrue if that's actually the case. One, you don't have a separate AI governance effort or AI data governance effort. And two, you have one set of criteria that you're applying globally on there, and it might actually do it. Now, I haven't gotten anybody to buy into that just yet, but that's sort of Peter's nirvana, and maybe it's just a pipe dream. What do you guys think? Talk me down.
Well,
Peter,
go ahead, Kim.
I side with you a little bit, specifically if we're talking about AI data governance, right? Like the AI, or excuse me, the data that's being leveraged for AI should apply to the same governance frameworks or modules that you have. But then there is a larger conversation of just how is AI being used. That's probably bigger than just the data piece. So I'm not sure if that was maybe part of the question as well. And that definitely see falls more into, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of kind of these like tiger team projects in organizations that are spearheading some AI development and utilization within their organizations. So maybe like yes and to that question.
Clearly my thinking is off the top of the cuff. Mark, any thoughts?
Well, I like the distinction Kim makes between AI governance and AI data governance, or data governance for AI. As I came to the realization a while ago now, turns out that we get a year older every year, Peter. Um, that AI governance is actually vastly different than data governance, although you may have some similar tenets and similar sounding roles, but the nature of risk and things that you document and how things are managed in an organization as it relates to AI models and functions and agents and all of these things are quite a bit different, which I find fascinating. Um, but yeah, so I think I think it doesn't really affect governance, data governance models that we have. I don't really. I think they're separate enough that you would have your own AI governance function at an organization compared to data governance. You would understand the architecture of how AI interacts with data at your organization, but it might not even be represented in an architectural model. Maybe, like, it might not even hit this.
Now, I'll
So
offer a counterpoint if I can.
yeah.
And when you're doing data governance, one of the things that comes up as a topic is ethics, and that instantly moves you into corporate ethics, even though most people don't think that data governance should necessarily expand to that long. But of course, my contention is if whatever you're doing involves the use of data, then it's going to have some data governance aspects to it that need to be concerned. And so, if data governance can expand to ethics, why can't data governance expand all to AI ethics in there as well? They're probably
That's an
not going to have
excellent
two
point.
separate
Yeah.
groups that you want to employ to work on them, or at least only a large company can have two groups of people going on. And I think you've got to make this somewhat palatable to the management on this. Who, remember, they're still fighting the Laura Madsons of the world out there that says data governance isn't working. Got to stop and blow it up and do it all over. Yeah, probably misquoting
Yeah.
Laura there badly, so I apologize, Laura, if that's the case. She makes an excellent case for herself. Look up her stuff; she's really good. But yes, it is an issue with all that. Again, Kim, I babbled for a minute there. Any thoughts on it?
Peter, I think you wrapped that one up pretty good.
All right. Well, we'll see if my way proceeds or not, but you heard it here first, folks.
I do like the ethics tie-in, and it's a stark reminder for everybody who's hanging out for Q&A here, to remember the ethics in data, especially as it relates to AI. I was just sending a friend of mine a paper showing an AI model that did credit score and loan approvals for a bank, and there was bias in the data that was unchecked. There was no human in the loop, and all of a sudden, you're denying loans to certain demographic groups based on bias in the data, which is not reputationally good. And so there's a good example of the intersection between data governance and AI governance with respect to ethics. So I'm glad you raised that,
It's
Peter.
kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like trying to manage your data separate from your information.
Yeah.
yeah, good luck, right? I mean, it's just let's be realistic and say that it's all built out of the same building blocks. So let's see if we can gain some synergies from it. If we do discover we need to specialize, then there maybe that's a subcommittee or something. But I think that particularly at first, as we're all sort of getting, remember, we don't teach MBAs anything about ethics as they're growing up for the most part. So it literally comes from these types of sessions where they get them. And it's appalling to me, but I am not in charge of the system, so do what I can.
For sure. We've got another wonderful question here that I'm sure we'll go down the rabbit hole on again. Since data architecture is a process, not a product, does a data architect help define a suite of products that might help support the activities that move toward the adoption of a data architecture program? Does data governance / data architecture require a suite of products?
Kim, you want to take it?
Yeah. So, this is really gonna when you're talking to the product vendor here, right? So like,
Absolutely.
yeah, right, but no, really, this is gonna vary from organization to organization. You are probably not going to build everything, right? You're probably going to have some tools and purchases. I mean, of course, whether that's a database, whether that's event streaming services, right? All of these things that either house or move data around your organization. You're going to have different complementary products and tools and systems that work together. And that's really where the strategy comes in, right? What is important to you in terms of latency, governance, agility, how much do you as an organization like to build versus buy, right? And so I think those are the higher level conversations that happen first and then kind of influence the direction of what needs to be procured for your organization to deliver on that.
Couldn't agree more with you, Kim. And again, I know you're trying to be very circumspect here, but let's be realistic. If you can take a bunch of your existing environments and replace them with a more or less unified environment, it's going to be something in a big way that you can do to simplify your environment. And that's one of the value propositions that you absolutely should evaluate as you're looking these things over. Yes, data architecture likely is changing. There's probably less need to develop a new set of data architectures, but probably very good value in revising existing ones that are there. Let me just give you a quick example. It's not really architectural, but it's representative of the kind of thing that we need to address. And that is, in the past, we would have taught you all how to do your date field. You would have taken, calculating age. You would never store my age, which is 66. Instead, you would subtract from 2025, the year of my birth, 1959, and come up with the 66 that way. And that makes perfectly good sense under the circumstances that you were designing it. However, let's assume that you're doing that for literally billions of customers, billions of times a day. Maybe it's time at that point to say, no, we really need to change our approach to architecting this data so that we don't pay the cloud vendor, whatever it is, a huge amount of sums to recalculate data that's not used much on a basis. But of course, when you simply forklift the data into the cloud, as many organizations unfortunately have had to do, it becomes problematic given that. And so once again, it really does help to have some guidance around that and some people that have some good data experience, and those are going to be your data architects there. So anyway, Peter pontificating again.
I know, it's awesome. Thank you, Peter. I think we have time for one last question here. How do data architects collaborate with data engineers, analysts, and business stakeholders, and how are decisions made when multiple teams have conflicting data requirements?
But the owner sorted out in a cage match, right? Sorry, that
Enter
was
the
important.
octagon.
Yeah. Kim, you want to give this one a crack?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're not far off with your cage match answer, but it's difficult, right? That is a tough thing to get to, is a consensus on data requirements when you have that much the difference between stakeholders. I think this comes back to agility and finding tools or processes that support that in general. That's the only way I think you're going to win, and agility becomes a huge differentiator, whether you're talking about the ability to bring on new sources of data, or agility in how that data is sent to consuming systems or presented in different ways. So that's maybe the key thing I would just encourage you to look for as you're building these architectures, is how do I support agility in this process? Because I think there's just more unknowns in the future than knowns.
Mark, thoughts?
You guys covered it really well, such that I don't have any additional thoughts.
Well,
It's the
agree
first.
100% with Kim and Mark as well, since I got a chance, right? And add two pieces to what Kim said as well, which is that you have the opportunity to exercise a common vocabulary and more or less codifying that into something that can be used by the organization. And you have fewer translations that need to occur between the various information sources and syncs that are there. And that's both on a automated basis and also in the people trying to talk about it basis as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, that's pretty much bringing us to time here. So thank you, chat and Q&A, for being so electric and engaging. Thank you so much to Kim and the Reltio team for sponsoring today's session and having some
Yes, Kim,
wonderful
thanks. Pleasure to
input
have you back again this year.
perspective.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you, Peter. And I'll give the floor to you guys for any last thoughts before I hit the end webinar button.
There's an end webinar button. I never knew that. Everybody have a great day. I don't have anything, Kim.
No, I'm all set. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Great to have you. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
everybody.